Okay, we are at 11. So good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. My name is Razieh Farzad, and I'm an assistant professor and seafood safety extension specialist with Food Science and Human Nutrition Department at University of Florida and Florida Sea Grant. Thank you for joining our virtual office hour. I'm excited to have three of our amazing extension agent with Florida Sea Grant to join us today, and also Dr. Ropiki, who is our economist at Florida Sea Grant. So I want to start the office hour with asking our panelists to introduce themselves, and then I'll go, let me go through some housekeeping issues before starting first. But make sure that you're muted during the office hour. Unless you have a question, you can unmute yourself, ask your question, or if you are more comfortable, put your question in the chat. And also, we are going to have a post-evaluation survey that I will share with you and through the email. And I appreciate if you answer the survey, because it's going to help us improve our program and tailor it in a way that is more valuable for you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and ask my panelists to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with Angela?
Good morning. My name is Angela Collins, and I am the Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent, and I'm based in the Manatee County area.
Libby Carnahan, IFAS Florida Sea Grant Extension Agent in Pinellas County.
Brittany?
Brittany Hall-Sharf. I am the Florida Sea Grant Agent located in Hernando County.
And last but not the least, Dr. Ropiki.
I'm Andrew Ropiki. I'm an assistant professor in the Food and Resource Economics Department and Florida Sea Grant Marine Economics Specialist.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We are going to start this office hour with a presentation from Dr. Ropiki. He's going to talk us about the economic impact of red tide in our state. And then I ask all the agents to give some sort of updates about the situation of red tide around the state. And we have some pre-submitted questions that we will address them. And I hope that we get more questions during our discussion. Andrew, you have the floor. You can share your screen, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Okay, can everybody see some slides up? Okay, good.
Yep, we just see your notes view though, Andrew.
Oh, okay, let me try it in. Does that help or no?
Go back the way you were, but just click presentation mode. You were just in the notes view. Yeah, there you go. And then, yeah. Oh. It was perfect. Go back and then go to the bottom
Right here?
right corner where that looks like a slideshow. Just click that button. Oh, sorry. Keep going to the right. You're almost there.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, well.
It does this sometimes. It shows one screen. Sorry about that. I'll just do it.
Go to the top where it says
Let's just go with basic. Let me switch the. Sorry.
I will just say I got stuck in where I couldn't do get the right view on Zoom and had no idea why. It's a constant learning effort.
And I'm going to try this. So you're going to see yourselves for a second, and then from beginning, please.
Perfect.
Okay, wonderful. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me go back. We did some surveys in 2020, kind of looking at the economic impacts of the big 2018 red tide, and we actually call it 2017 to 2019 just because it spans so long. And what we looked at was two different marine recreational activities or sectors. We looked at charter for hire operators, charters, guides, headboat operators, and then other marine recreational industries, and that was kind of a catch-all, boat, jet ski sales, maintenance and rentals, storage, accessory sales. Well, you can see the list there. And our survey was sent broadly to industry members across the state of Florida, just trying to get as many responses as we could, given that COVID was going on, and we knew we weren't going to get a big response rate. So we just kind of blanketed these industries. And the survey asked them about a number of things. A background section on their business, kind of where are you located, what do you do, how much money do you make, when do you make that money during a year, things like that. Was Red Tide present locally during 2018 or during the event in your local waters? And then the real goal of the survey was to determine how their revenues were impacted by the red tide. And we wanted to look at it kind of 3 different ways. The first was when red tide was present locally in your local waters, we would expect an impact then. When it was not present locally, because it shifts and moves. So when it was going on somewhere else, but wasn't in your local waters. And then after the event ended in 2019, kind of was there a hangover effect? So just focusing on Southwest Florida, where the biggest impacts were, our Charter for Hire survey, we had 59 responses, so not the greatest response rate. Like we said, we did this during COVID, so it was hard to get people to respond. 90% of our respondents indicated that red tide was present locally at some time during the event, and the average duration and average number of months red tide was present locally, it might not have been continuous, was about 8.3. When we asked about their average revenue change, as I said, we looked at when red tide was present locally, when the event was still going on, but it wasn't in their local waters, and then lastly, after the event ended. And across the board, what we found was, it generally had negative impacts in all 3 periods. The small sample size kind of made it hard to draw, specific estimates or conclusions regarding, subdivisions within the industry. But overall, we were kind of able to take all the information we gathered and estimate among those that responded how much it changed their revenue. And what you see is, this red tide event started in 2017, very late, and there was a very small impact there. The big impact, obviously, 2018, almost the entire year was impacted. And as you can see, businesses lost about 1/4 of their revenue. And in 2019, we kind of had this lag effect. We had a hangover effect, as they had about 10% or 9 or 10%, they were down their average revenue. The marine recreational industry is just kind of an oddity that we had the exact same number of respondents. The red tide presence was 9 out of every 10 respondents said it was present at some point in their local waters. And the average number of months of red tide or that it was present locally was almost right on top of our other survey, 8.5 months versus 8.3. Once again, just looking at, I'm trying to go quickly so I don't take others' time. See, generally, revenues were down, more so during the event than when red tide was present locally, than during when it wasn't, and after the event. But generally, as you would expect, these businesses felt negative impacts. And looking at their average revenue changes by year, what we see is that a very similar story, right on top of the numbers we got for the Charter for Hire operators in terms of biggest impact in 2018. For these marine recreational industries, we did see a little bit, even a bigger hangover in 2019, with revenue down about 14%. Escape, stop share here. So on top of that, that was the part of the study I really focused on. I will add to the chat, or we'll show you later, we have a very broad report that talks about impacts related to Airbnb revenues and more general tourism that might be of interest to some of you. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone has any question for Andrew? Okay, I'm gonna start asking a question. So did you actually ask any of the seafood restaurants in your survey, or do you have any plan to talk with the seafood restaurants?
Yeah, that's a good question. This was kind of a first stab at this research. We were funded by the West Coast Inland Navigation District, and we currently have a funding through the Gulf Coast Ocean Observation System, GCOOS, to do a much broader study and look at things like health impacts, commercial seafood industry. So we're hoping to get at some of those numbers as well. But this one, so far what we have is really focused in on either tourism through the Airbnb work, which you can see in that study I posted to the chat, and what I just presented, kind of the survey of these marine recreational industries.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any question from Andrew? I don't see any question in the chat, but I think Angela actually shared the report of your research, Andrew, in the chat. So anyone has access to it. We have a question in the chat, actually. Any plans to survey the Tampa Bay region after these current red tide events? After it subsides, do you have any plan to?
Well, we would like to. We've still got our hands full, unfortunately, dealing with the 2018 red tide, and they just seem to be becoming more and more frequent. But that is something we will definitely look into, and we think we definitely would like to, because we think what we captured in this 2018 red tide, the survey information we have, will serve as a baseline, and we can start measuring these things going forward.
So I have another question. So the survey that you had, do you think the COVID impact kind of like overlapped with the red tide impact or not?
Well, what I can tell you is I guarantee you it hurt our response rate. People were just getting so many surveys left and right specific to COVID and just, in general, that I think we could have done better with response rates if, people were concerned with other things, and rightfully so. You wanted to keep your business running and try and figure out how to stay afloat. So that might be a reason to, start to look at the current Tampa Bay one kind of going forward, because, maybe people have kind of hopefully climbed out of, or at least partially out of the COVID hole, and can kind of start looking at this stuff, and we'll be closer to the event.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone else have any question from Dr. Opiki? Okay, I don't see any question in the chat either. Should we start with Angela talking about, give us some update about your counties, how's the red tide situation?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and just to comment, Razieh, a little bit on the question that you had posed to Andrew a minute ago about the COVID, kind of like the perfect storm of all of this stuff. I know, speaking for the Tampa Bay area and for a lot of our coastal businesses, including the restaurant businesses and a lot of the seafood industries, sales were down, especially in the restaurants. Anyway, because of this like horrible red tide that we experienced in the 2017 to 2019 period, and then COVID happened in 2020. So I just like to take that opportunity to throw it out there to the world that if you can support your local industries in whatever way you can, now is definitely a good time to do that, because they've been hit from all sides over the past few years. So Andrew gave a really good overview of some of the economic impacts that were based on the last red tide bloom. But as everyone is well aware, we're currently in an active bloom situation in the Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay area. I don't know if anyone has any specific questions, but I can say that some of the values inside of the bay were very high in mid-July, but we are seeing some of the values in the bay going down. So that's good. We are seeing more impacts though along the beaches, especially further to the south. So we started seeing impacts on Longboat Key and some of the areas a little bit south of Tampa Bay that hadn't been there earlier in July. We are seeing some impacts there currently. And then we do still have anywhere from low to medium to high counts on the beaches in northern Manatee County. I think Libby could probably speak a little bit more to what's going on in Pinellas County, but the rains that we've had over the past few days and that freshwater input is a good thing for the inside of the bay, because the freshwater pulses actually kind of push the bloom out. The red tide organism, Karenia brevis, prefers saltier water. So as we get more of this freshwater influx inside of the bay anyway, you'll see the bloom conditions sort of move around following those salinity regimes. And then I'm here to answer any specific questions about it, but that's just sort of a quick update. I do know that Manatee County has removed almost 19 tons, which is nothing near the amount that Pinellas County has removed of dead sea life from their beaches. And they do have active beach raking going on currently in Manatee County and removing the dead sea life from the public beaches. So that is still going on.
Thank you, Angela. So good to hear that things are getting a little better, but just hearing about all these fish kill makes me so sad. Brittany, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm a little bit north of Tampa Bay in the Hernando County area. We are in a monitoring stage. This is the first time that the red tide has reached Hernando. So it's quite new for us. We've had a monitoring program for the past 5.5 years. We are doing weekly samples right now. We typically do monthly, but we have upped to weekly samples. This past week, we have showed 4 samples come in with very low to background concentrations. The previous week, we had a few samples come in with low to very low concentrations. We've had 1 fish kill report that extended about 8 miles off of our main channel of Hernando Beach and went all the way out. It was spotty for about 18 miles. We do not have any current reports for stranded dolphins or manatees or turtles at this time. Our main message for our area right now, since we are in full swing with scalloping, is to please be mindful where you launch and go scalloping. Stay away from the areas that have shown positive for the red tide cells, because cooking those scallops is not going to fully remedy that red tide toxin.
Thank you, Brittany. And then Libby.
Morning. Thank you for putting this together, Razieh. Yes, I'm here in Pinellas County, and unfortunately, with this bloom so far, it seems like we've been dealing with the brunt of it, both inside Tampa Bay and now more so on our beaches. So I got a little bit of information. The city of St. Pete has been working very hard and diligently, but they're also working in collaboration with Pinellas County. So just to kind of share, the city has spent $700,000 in their money and have put over 200 staff on the job, mostly from Public Works and Parks departments. At the same time, the county, and I do have the number of fish they collected, but I just misplaced it. So together with the county, they've done a total of 1,776 tons of marine life collected. So as Angela, what was your number again? Oh, I wrote down 19. So 19 tons for Manatee County, 1,776 for Pinellas County so far, just to put it in perspective. the midweek report that came out from FWRI. So how they do that is they collect water samples and then they process them. So there's a bit of a lag with those red tide samples. So we get a midweek report on Wednesday from Fish and Wildlife and then a Friday full report. And the Wednesday midweek report that's out shows 25 background to high level concentrations in Pinellas County inshore and off of our beaches. As Angela said, the conditions have been improving in the bay. And that's compared to how bad they were in the middle of July. And then they are continuing to degrade somewhat on the beaches. So we'll share, I won't share all the resources throughout this talk, but I mean at this time, but we'll share different resources for how to check on red tide. You want to be, for yourself, you want to be mindful of respiratory irritation if that causes you a problem to avoid the beaches. But we just want to say, I agree with Angela though, check out the places that you know you shouldn't go to, but then it's not all uniform. Keep in mind that this red tide is very patchy in terms of counties. If you're from another place and you want to come to our beaches, you can find a Gulf beach to go to that is not impacted by red tide, and you know you can find restaurants and so on. So just so that. Oh, okay. That was a different question that we'll have to look up the answer to, asking about the tons collected in the past. And I just want to give a little shout out since I still have the floor, but just in 2018, I think Pinellas County, under the leadership of Kelly Levy, really looked at what was happening in Manatee and Sarasota counties as they got hit first, and was able to learn a lot through that effort. And we started, you know, bringing in fishermen to collect the fish offshore and other inshore fishermen to collect fish inshore so they can hopefully get some small supplemental income during this time, but also help in the greater effort so those dead fish don't end up on our beaches and our shores and become a problem. So really, you know, in the past, like say 30 years ago, I'm not sure we would have had a number of tons of fish collected because we were more kind of allowing it to happen to us and not maybe playing such a role in trying to kind of intercept these dead fish offshore to keep the main problem off the beaches.
I did just look up that number, Libby, the number in response to Victoria's question for the 2017 to 2019 red tide inside of Tampa Bay or that Tampa Bay area, it was about 2,200 tons. That was the Tampa Bay number. And then the Sarasota Bay number was in addition to that. So I can put a link in the chat that can take you guys to that site to see those numbers specifically. The Science and Environment Council created a couple nice infographics about the impacts of the 2017 to 2019 bloom on both Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay estuaries. So I'll plop that link in the chat right now.
Thank you, Angela. Does anyone else have any question about the updates that our agents just gave us? So Brad asked, so as bad as this red tide is, it's not as bad as 2-3 years ago.
Brad, I'll start with the answer to that. No, I think we just compared the number 2,200 to 1,776. So it's higher, but that was like a 17-month event, Angela, or I mean, it was a very long event that we'll share how many months it was. But right now we're talking about an event that just started really June and July of this year. And so this is possibly the beginning of an event. So I would not say that, Brad. I would not say that it's not as bad as 2018 or 2019. It's the beginning, so we can't make those determinations yet.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would also say that this event is probably worse inside of Tampa Bay than it was in 2017 to 2019. The 2017 to 2019 significantly impacted Sarasota Bay and impacted Tampa Bay, but to a much lesser extent. So Tampa Bay has felt the full force of this current bloom.
Thank you, Angela. Do we have any other questions? Okay, I don't see any question in the chat. We had a couple of pre-submitted questions. I'm going to go ahead and start it with those. So the first question that we have is, has it been quantified how much the Piney Point release had an effect on rapid intensification of the red tide? And is this a man-made tragedy? Angela, do you want to address that?
Sure. I mean, I think, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the chat a link to the Suncoast Waterkeepers event that they hosted last week or the week before. They hosted an event recently, and they invited both the directors of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program and also the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program to address specifically this question. So, you know, definitely the Piney Point event did not help conditions inside of the bay because it was such a high nutrient release event, and that nutrient was in the form that was bioavailable for these phytoplankton that, you know, but we also know that red tide blooms do begin offshore, then they move inshore, and then they can be fed by these inshore conditions. So I think that the estuary program directors both did a really good job addressing that question and talking about that. The Tampa Bay Estuary Program has a stellar website set up to look at Piney Point response and monitoring that has been going on since the releases began in April. So I'm going to stick, again, links to both of those resources in the chat for you guys to check out. I highly encourage you to check out Tampa Bay Estuary Program site because they do have just a killer dashboard with a whole bunch of really good information on the monitoring response inside of Tampa Bay after Piney Point.
So to follow up that question, somebody asked, what happens to the red tide toxins accumulated in marine life that is buried? Is groundwater or well water at risk?
Wait, say that again?
What happens to the red tide toxins accumulated in a marine life that is buried? Is groundwater or well water at risk? I think that's a very good research question.
That is a good question, but we don't have any indication. We don't have any indication to date that groundwater or well water is impacted. Most of the sea life that's disposed of is taken to municipal waste facilities. But Libby, did you have a better response to that?
No, I guess I was wondering whether they were talking about the marine life that naturally dies in the ocean and falls to the bottom, or I guess how we're disposing of this current marine life. But in Pinellas, I guess I'm not totally sure, but are we?
I think they
asked
about
whether we're incinerating the marine life or whether we're burying.
That they are asking the marine life that we actually catch. That's what I get from the question.
Okay, well, let me look into that for 1 minute and I'll get back to you.
Okay, let's go through the pre-submitted question. We have a couple of more questions in the chat and then we go over those. So there is another question about, is there any way to prevent the red tide? And is there anything public or private agencies can do to prevent red tide? I can start with that. This is not a man-made event. It has been like years, 1,000 years that is happening in Florida. So preventing it might be hard, but there are new technologies that we can actually model and predict if it's happening and do some stuff to mitigate the effect. But preventing it might be hard. Angela, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that you're exactly right. Preventing it would probably be something that would not be possible, but maybe minimizing the length of time it sticks around, minimizing the severity of the blooms and the duration of the blooms is something that we can all play a part in as far as just reducing nutrient loads in our estuaries is something that's good for all kinds of reasons, but it would probably assist with not prolonging these bloom events once they come into the inshore waters. It couldn't hurt anyway.
Thank you. There was another question that, is there a specific time of the year that red tide is more prevalent? Brittany, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Red tides can occur all months of the year. I want to say they typically start around August to February, but again, they have been noted at all times of the year.
Great, Thank you. And there was a question about, that's a question. I was wondering if planting water hyacinths and other filtering type plants along the canals would help clean water discharges. I did a little bit of research, and it shows that this kind of plant filtering plant can help with reducing the nitrogen and phosphorus in the water and cleaning the water in general, but they might have some other side effects because something like hyacinth is very hardy and they might stay and become invasive and cause other problems. So although it might sound like an easy solution and they have potential, there is always some negative to it as well, but this is something that scientists are following up to see how they can use the natural resources to reduce the high level of nitrogen and phosphorus in the water that are the main reason that this hazardous algal bloom are happening. Does anyone else have any comments on that?
I would just agree that natural shorelines are always preferable to a hardened shoreline. Anything that's native plants and keeping the coastal systems as buffered as possible. Anything that can help reduce nutrient input into the waterways is probably a good thing, assuming that it's a native species and not invasive.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so these are our pre-submitted. Oh, there was a question about current mitigation technologies of red tide. I can go ahead and get it started, and if anyone else has anything to add to it. I think the most recent technology that I came across my mind was the clay technology that one of the Oceanographic Institute, I think Dr. Anderson is working on it. So they are trying to use this natural clay slurries to help with absorbing the Karenia brevis. That is the main reason of red tide in Florida. And also many like satellite sensing to predict if it's happening offshore and when it's coming closer to the shore. All of those are the newer technologies that came to my mind. Libby, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. A couple of years ago for Salty Topics, my kind of marine science speaker series, we hosted a gentleman from GCUS that Andrew already brought up, but they're working, and they worked with Pinellas County actually on a pilot study with citizen scientists using handheld iPhones to then be able to check water samples for the presence of Karenia brevis and to possibly try and speed up the sort of response that we get so that we can have, instead of waiting for a Wednesday midweek report and a Friday report that are based on samples that were collected about, a week or a few days previous, that we could get more instantaneous data. So I haven't followed what's been happening with that in the past couple of years, but just to say that the citizen science technology realm and handheld devices kind of, they're in the game of trying to help solve the problem of red tide.
Thank you, Libby. I think we have a couple of questions in the chat that I'm gonna go over them. So the first question that we didn't address yet is that Karenia brevis has dropped in the bay, but are there out of the range algae or other dissolved materials like cyanobacteria or other piney point related toxins?
Well, we did have a bad cyanobacteria bloom in the lower part of the bay, especially in that area around Anna Maria. We had a significant cyanobacteria bloom in July and late June. That has started to dissipate, which is a good thing. So yeah, there are multiple things going on in the summertime. It's not just Karenia brevis. The bay experiences different species of harmful algae throughout the year. And yeah, the cyanobacteria one this year was worse than it normally is.
I'm on the FDEP site and can just really quickly say that for the Piney Point monitoring, they're monitoring ammonia, orthophosphate, nitrate, chlorophyll, turbidity, total nitrogen, total phosphorus. So that is what I see that's being shared with the public. So I don't see, they're not monitoring. So it looks like they're monitoring the primary contaminants that might have come out of Piney Point. And they're not necessarily looking for like secondary things like blooms might have happened as a result of these contaminants. So those may be measured by the estuary program and available on their dashboard, as they're doing more of like the macro algae, folks. USF really stepped up. It was kind of almost reminiscent, the oil spill. We're unfortunately learning how to coordinate for disaster response pretty well in Tampa Bay. So folks, at USF and Tampa Bay Estuary Program and all the counties and really everyone just got on conference calls really early when the red tide started getting bad. And I'll say it's just great to see the coordination and to see the leadership of the Tampa Bay and Sarasota estuary programs at this time. Sarasota's got a new director within the past year or so, David Tomasco. And so he's got a lot of good, solid history in Tampa Bay. We won't say how many years, Dave. And that joins Ed Sherwood as director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. I'll just give a little plug. Late in October, we do actually have the Bay Area Scientific Information Symposium. So we're going to have a sit-down 5-day meeting together with the National Estuary Program National Conference in Tampa Bay this year. And so red tide will be an issue that will be discussed.
Thank you, Libby.
So my little plug. I don't even think registration's up yet.
Thank you, Libby. There is another question from Angela, and they ask, can Angela expand on the impacts of rain in the bay and the beaches?
The impacts of rain and what?
In the bay.
Oh, well, just that lower salinities, the red tide organism typically doesn't do as well in the lower salinities. So if we get a lot of rain, it can sort of push the bloom. It doesn't necessarily get rid of it by any stretch, but it can move it around. So, you won't maybe see it near the mouth of the Manatee River as much when you have a lot of rain because there's a lot of freshwater input. So, having some of that rain over the past week has probably helped, at least in some of those areas, real close to freshwater outflows. Does that answer the question, I hope?
Angela, let me ask you, is that also a little bit of a catch-22 since the freshwater rain brings the runoff of that source pollution?
That's an excellent point. Yeah, absolutely. And typically when we do get red tide blooms, this year we got a red tide bloom a lot earlier than we normally do, before we had even had any rains. We started experiencing these bloom conditions before the rainy season technically started, because we were sort of coming out of a drought the past 6 months or so. We started getting the rains, and that definitely could be exacerbating the situation too, because it is bringing a bunch of nutrient-rich waters from the freshwater systems that eventually make their way through the bay. So yeah, that's a loaded question.
Thank you, Angela. There's another question. It's the $1 million question, as they call it. Any idea how this red tide event will progress over the coming weeks and months?
So I'm gonna again cop out and put a link in the website to the Ocean Circulation Group's tracking and prediction model and forecast website. It's a pretty great thing that USF maintains, and they actually show models that they use based on oceanographic currents and water column parameters, and they predict it doesn't predict over the next few months, but it does predict at least over the next few days where the red tide is predicted to be experienced and how conditions are expected to be exacerbated. So I'm going to drop that link in the chat as well. You should bookmark it, because I look at it a lot just to see how the forecasts are predicting the bloom to move along our coasts. I'll stick that link in the chat.
And
now.
I can email all of the links that has been in the chat to all the people who register to the event after this. Thank you for sharing the links, Angela.
Yes. I do have an answer to a past question. If you
Sure. Go ahead.
So the question about the groundwater and whether fish were impacting that. Well, luckily, we're not even going to get as far as the research question, because the fish that we collect offshore in Pinellas County are disposed of at the waste to energy plant. So they are incinerated and then turned into energy for the Duke Power Plant. And then the inshore fish are put into the landfill, and that is a lined landfill that obviously is already prepared for any other kind of contaminants that will enter it. So there should not be any leaks or breaches in the groundwater.
Thank you, Libby. So we have another question that has been sent to me directly, and it's if we were able to completely eliminate red tide blooms in the area, would there be a downside to other aspects of the healthy marine environment? Is there a benefit of having a red tide bloom?
I'll just say that, I don't know, just as a biologist, you know, with food chains are, you know, very complicated, obviously things. And so we're not really sure, you know, there's a lot of disease and predation and things in the wild that we don't fully understand. That might be keeping systems in check from one, you know, possibly one organism gaining too much, getting too big, or, you know, an apex predator getting too big. So I'll just say that, you know, that since it is a natural event and we know it's been around for more than 2 centuries, that, you know, we can't say whether there would be potentially negative events from not, you know, it might have some small positive that we don't necessarily see in terms of keeping a food web in check, I'll just say, but that's all I'll say about that. I do want to add with questions about other harmful algal blooms and stuff. I will just say in Upper Tampa Bay, we have a problem child that's trichodesmium. And so that's been up there for years, you know, as Tampa Bay Estuary Program monitors the health of the bay. Upper Tampa Bay north of the Courtney Campbell Causeway just always seems to lag behind. And so that's something researchers have looked at. But so we do have other harmful algal blooms as well that we can test with in this region.
Thank you, Libby. There is another question about, do you expect tropical storms and hurricane to help disperse the HABs?
I can chime in there. That can be a mixed result. You can have the hurricanes actually make it worse because you're taking all the nitrogen and phosphate from the land and you're now pushing it to the inshore waters and essentially giving the bloom food, or it can help disperse it far enough and end the bloom. So it can go either way.
Thank you. And finally, a question for me. How about seafood safety? So during the bloom, it's highly recommended not to do recreational harvesting of molluscan shellfish, oyster, crab, and mussels, because these are filter feeders and they actually accumulate the toxin in their body. For something like a scallop, the toxin is not going to accumulate in the mussel that we eat, but in the intestine and GI tract, it accumulates. So if you eat a scallop that is harvested from the bay, make sure that you're cleaning it properly, because then again, I think Brittany mentioned that by cooking, you cannot get rid of the toxins. And seafoods that are available in our restaurants, they are safe because all the seafood are getting tested by Florida Department of Health. If anything has any toxin at the dangerous level, you are not going to consume it. At the restaurant, although I understand you might go to many of the seafood restaurants are at the beach and you might feel like you have problem breathing and all of those things, but those not coming from eating the seafood. It's from the respiratory disturb from the wave and all of those things. And many of the shellfish that are available in our seafood restaurants in Florida are not locally sourced. We are getting them from other areas, and they are not sourced at the time of the red tide. So if you buy anything from grocery stores and restaurants, those are safe to eat. I think you should be really careful about recreational fishing and going on doing the shellfish. If a shellfish area is closed, don't collect any shellfish area, harvest any shellfish from those areas. And also, if a fish is dead, don't eat it because that's dangerous. And also, if they are selling the fish fillet in the restaurant, those fish fillet are safe to eat as well, because the toxin usually accumulate in the liver, kidney, and GI tract of the fish. Does anyone else want to add anything to that?
So I guess I'm not sure. I'm going to tease out of all that you just said. If you,
Okay.
fish right now in Tampa Bay.
Okay.
You know, if someone were to fish for snapper, fronts, you know, just some. I mean, I guess the bait fish aren't really aren't really the issue. But yeah, did you say that that right now people should practice catch and release in the bay and near shore, or would you?
Finfish, if it's cleaned properly and if they are just eating the fillet, the general rule of thumb is that they are safe.
Okay, so
For
the general rule of thumb is
shellfish,
that if they have contaminants at all, they're concentrating in other parts of the fish, not in the fillet.
The fillet is gonna be safe. That being said, it's just like sometimes it's personal choice. So if you want to be cautious, you can be cautious. For shellfish, I suggest don't do any like shellfish harvesting if the area is closed. And usually even area that you have permit to harvest shellfish, they are automatically closed if red tide is happening.
Yeah, and just a reminder for everyone, there's no scalloping in Tampa Bay. Brittany can remind us about the scalloping north of Tampa Bay. I know Pasco is a pretty new season that's been added, but still nothing in Pinellas, even though we do see more scallops and do our monitoring with the scallop counts, but we don't necessarily foresee a time when we'd have enough scallops in Tampa Bay to open a recreational harvest.
Yeah, Pasco season has opened and closed already. In Pasco, they had a higher bloom concentration of your low to high around Anclote. But moving north of that Pasco Hernando line, we've had you know, low, very low to background, not present numbers. So a lot of people, when it was open in Pasco, they did avoid that lower Anclote area and we're going north to harvest. Pasco is closed now. So it's just Hernando and north to Levy. For our opening closing zone, you'd have to go to FWC's map to see the rest. But for Hernando specifically, we are still open. So just please check that FWC map before you go out to see what the latest bloom concentration is, and go somewhere else if it's present.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say really quickly on the commercial side too, they will close down if someone has a clam or oyster farm and water is impacted by red tide, they'll close it down if they can't harvest. So if you're seeing it at a retailer, it should be safe. And it kind of leads to an interesting economic note. I was talking with someone Angela put me in touch with, Aaron at Two Dock Seafood. The clams actually kind of like when red tide's around. They do just fine. You can't harvest them. The problem is they do so well, they grow so quickly, they blow right past market size and kind of become not as valuable for the producer. But yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah, that makes a good point. I was gonna reiterate the same thing, Andrew, is that all of the commercially available seafood is going to be safe, regardless of, it's one of the most highly regulated products on the market. So if you see it at a restaurant or you see it at the store, then it is without a doubt safe to eat. The concern is obviously the recreational harvesting, and then you know, FWC and FDACS maintain maps of open and closed recreational harvest areas for shellfish. And then as far as the recreational angling goes, as Libby mentioned, just make sure you look at your regs, because even for catch, some of the species right now inside the bay are catch and release only because of the red tide. But if they're, you know, the recommendation is obviously don't dip fish from the surface that are struggling to live. Those would not be good ones to eat. But if they're taking your hook and they're healthy enough to take the hook, the recommendation is that the fillets are typically fine. But any internal organs, don't, you know, eat the fish whole. No liver eating, intestines, stomach, anything like that. That's typically where the toxin is going to be the most concentrated. But again, commercially available seafood is completely safe to eat.
Yes, thank you, Angela. So we have a question: is our elderly population more at risk from the aerosolization of the red tide toxins? So if you're older, are you more at risk?
This is, I guess I would say, first of all, none of us are really medical experts or qualified to speak to the medical side of it. I don't necessarily think, I'll just give anecdotal evidence. I've always been pretty sensitive to it, and I don't think I'm old. No, I lived on the beach out when I was in graduate school, and that was 2003, I think, the year I was on the beach, and we had a decent red tide, and I would notice it there. I would say definitely anyone with a respiratory condition you're going to want to be extra careful with them. So asthma, COPD, anything like that, you would imagine if they already have a respiratory condition that this could add to it. And then, just older people that we're trying really hard to protect from coronavirus and everything. I mean, I would, try and go to a beach that, doesn't have red tide, and then see how everyone is. But just avoid beaches that say have respiratory problems. If you have anyone that you're at all concerned with their health, whether they're young or older.
Thank you. So the next question is, what do you recommend the general public do to be part of the solution to these environmental issues?
I started answering some of that in the chat. Reporting beach conditions through the Moat Marine Beach Conditions app. They're currently looking for volunteers. I know you can simply, if you see red water or a fish kill, FWC is asking you to report those. You can contact a local coordinator to see if you can go out and help collect these red tide samples. I know, like, even for my county, we went from monthly to weekly, and that takes a lot of manpower to do. I'll pass it off to Angela or Libby for your area.
I do believe that there was information available on the Pinellas County website, and I'll find that and share that, the Pinellas County Red Tide website. And so they did have opportunities for citizens if they wanted to help harvest the dead fish. I think that's a very personal choice, because once again, that's, I mean, we don't really think from coming into contact with the fish, but obviously that you would have negative reaction. But obviously, PPE would be highly recommended. But, if you want to help it from happening, everything that you could do as part of like the Tampa Bay Estuary Program's campaign of Be Floridian, all that is ways that we can help decrease contaminant runoff, kind of by decreasing fertilizer use, decreasing pesticide use, planting native plants to keep our soil in place and not eroding. I've got a very long, slow process going at home of trying this. I know a lot of us do. It doesn't happen overnight. So just incremental decisions that you can add to your life to, protect the bay. And the more you can share the information with your neighbors, really that is so impactful. And especially if you do things like put a rain barrel outside or plant native plants, they see that. And if you do it, in an attractive way, then they might want to be like you and do it too.
Thank you, Libby. So we have another question about the question. I think Libby might have mentioned this a little bit, but cyanobacteria has been linked to ALS, Parkinson's, and other kind of disease. Any thoughts about the dangers of swimming in high levels of Cyanea brevis or extended inhalation of the toxin?
So again, that's like a two-part question. And again, I have to do the disclaimer that none of us are health experts. And so I did put in the chat a link to the Department of Health's harmful algal blooms site. The Florida Department of Health maintains that, and they have recommendations there, not just for humans, but also for your pets, especially as related to things like cyanobacteria blooms. If there's a red tide bloom and you have respiratory irritation and you're experiencing that and you see fish that are dead floating in the water, it's not recommended that you get in the water, and it can have different impacts on different people depending on your personal composition. So as far as the human health impacts go and your risks, I would just make sure to if you're wondering about it, consult your physician or the Department of Health on some of the guidelines that they have out there for harmful algal blooms in people.
Thank you so much. I don't see any other question in the chat. Does anyone else have any question? Did I read all the question? So So if I have a post evaluation, oh, Libby, go ahead.
I was just going to say the link that I posted there with Pinellas County has the page just has lots of great links on it. So I won't copy and paste them all. But it does, you know, they share the dumpster locations, but also have a respiratory forecast on there that's coming from GCUS. That link might have been shared differently already. I'm not sure, but just so, yeah, I guess as we kind of wrap up in a second here, I guess one of my comments would just be, you know, that there's different websites that we've shared, so you can go to see various aspects of a beach forecast in terms of whether there's, you know, fish kill and dead fish smell, or whether there's respiratory irritation. And this is a rapidly changing issue. And so don't get stuck in the idea that like we're in this horrible red tide and you can't go anywhere on the coast. I would say, you know, keep up with it and keep up with the forecasts and hop around the beaches. Use this as a time to try new places you haven't tried before, and then come back to your old favorites when they're healthy again.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you all the panelists, Angela, Brittany, Andrew. It was great having you. I learned a lot from you guys. I hope everyone else have learned a lot as well. And yes, the meeting will be recorded and it's going to be available on our webpage, Seafood Virtual Office Hour webpage on Florida SIGA, and also our Facebook page. But I have a survey link that I'm going to send to the chat. And I appreciate if you take the time and answer the survey. It's going to really help us to make our program better. And if anyone else doesn't have any other like final comments, we can say goodbye and enjoy our Friday.